March 23rd, 1945, 0347 hours. The Rhine River, 12 kilometers south of Wesel, Germany. Captain Frank Novak stands at the helm of LCM-6 landing craft number 437, watching the eastern bank through night vision binoculars that don't exist yet. He's using Mark Warn eyeballs, standard issue since the Roman Empire, trying to spot German machine gun positions in darkness, so complete he can barely see his own bow ramp. Behind him, 183 men from the 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, crouch in 14 landing craft, waiting for the order to cross. They've been waiting for 3 hours, soaked by cold rain, watching the river current that runs at 7 knots, fast enough to sweep a landing craft half a mile downstream before reaching the opposite shore. The Rhine is 400 yards wide at this point. The eastern bank bristles with German defensive positions. Concrete bunkers, machine gun nests, pre-registered artillery coordinates, covering every obvious crossing point. 5 miles north, the British Second Army is launching Operation Plunder, the main Rhine crossing. 10,000 guns firing simultaneously, artificial moonlight from searchlights bouncing off clouds, 80,000 men crossing in the largest amphibious operation since D-Day. The noise is apocalyptic. Even 5 miles away, Novak feels the concussion from massed artillery. The sky to the north glows orange. Every German unit within 50 miles knows exactly where the Allies are crossing, which is exactly the point. Captain Novak's mission is different. While the Germans focus on the massive British crossing, the 2nd Battalion is supposed to slip across here, unnoticed, and secure a bridgehead 5 miles south. Once across, they'll attack German positions from the rear, collapsing the flank of the defensive line. But there's a problem. Landing craft make wakes. Distinctive V-shaped patterns of disturbed water, visible for miles, even at night. German observation posts along the Rhine have been watching for crossing attempts since March 7th, when the Allies captured the bridge at Remagen. The Germans know landing craft signatures. They know crossing tactics. They're waiting. Major Paul Henderson, battalion commander, crouches beside Novak in the cramped pilot house. "Frank, we need to go. The British assault started 20 minutes ago. Our window is closing." Novak doesn't answer immediately. He's thinking about something his father told him 15 years ago, back when Novak was 17, working summer jobs on Great Lakes cargo ships. His father, a merchant marine captain for 30 years, taught him about false wakes, how smugglers during Prohibition would tow submerged logs behind their boats to create multiple wake patterns, confusing Coast Guard observers about how many vessels were operating, how a skilled helmsman could use current and precise throttle control to minimize wake signature. The Rhine isn't Lake Michigan. The current is stronger, the stakes infinitely higher. But the principle might work. "Sir," Novak says slowly, "what if we don't make wakes?" Henderson stares at him. "Frank, that's not physically possible. Moving vessels create wakes. It's physics." "Not if we match current speed exactly. Not if we drift more than we motor. We'll end up miles downstream." "Yes, sir. But we'll be across, and the Germans won't see us coming." What Captain Novak is proposing violates every doctrine in the Army's river crossing manual. It contradicts engineering studies about optimal crossing angles. It ignores the carefully planned landing zones selected by division staff. but it might work. And Henderson knows their current plan, charging straight across under cover of darkness while hoping the Germans are distracted, has maybe a 50-50 chance of succeeding. He makes the decision commanders have been making since Alexander crossed the Hellespont. Show me. The Rhine River has been a military obstacle since Roman legions first reached its banks in 55 BC. Julius Caesar himself bridged it twice, marveling at the engineering challenge. In World War II, it becomes the final natural barrier protecting Germany's industrial heartland. By March 1945, the Allied advance has pushed German forces back to the Rhine along a 400-mile front. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery commands the 21st Army Group in the north. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley commands the 12th Army Group in the center. The Rhine crossings are the most carefully planned operations since D-Day. Montgomery's Operation Plunder, scheduled for March 23rd, involves months of preparation. Amphibious vehicles, assault boats, bridging equipment, smoke generators, specialized engineering units. The British amass 3,500 artillery pieces, more guns than the Germans used in their entire 1940 offensive through France. The artillery preparation alone will fire 65,000 shells in the first 2 hours. Artificial moonlight from 200 searchlights will illuminate the battlefield. The plan is overwhelming force applied with mathematical precision. But Montgomery's crossing zone is obvious. The Germans know exactly where it will happen. They've fortified the eastern bank with interlocking fields of fire, pre-positioned reserves, artillery coordinates covering every approach. German 15th Army, defending this sector, has 85,000 troops. Many are second-rate formations, old men and boys, but they're fighting from prepared positions on their own soil. German doctrine calls for concentrating forces at obvious crossing points and crushing Allied bridgeheads before they can expand. The Americans, always uncomfortable with Montgomery's methodical approach, want to force their own crossings before the British operation. Patton's Third Army crosses at Oppenheim on March 22nd, beating Montgomery by 24 hours. Patton famously calls Bradley to announce, "Brad, don't tell anyone, but I'm across." He makes it sound like a spontaneous raid. It isn't. Patton spent weeks positioning boats and training crews. 1st Infantry Division's crossing, scheduled for March 24th, is supposed to support Montgomery's operation by securing the southern flank. But someone at Corps headquarters has an idea. What if a small force crossed early, before the main assault, and infiltrated German rear areas? The mission falls to the 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry. They're Big Red 1 veterans, survivors of North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, and the Hurtgen Forest. They've made 3 opposed river crossings already. They know the drill. The drill is brutal. Load infantry into landing craft. Charge across under covering fire. Accept 20 to 30% casualties in the first wave. Establish a tiny foothold and expand it before German counterattacks destroy the bridgehead. River crossings are the deadliest operations in infantry combat. Troops are densely packed, exposed, unable to maneuver. A single artillery shell hitting a loaded landing craft can kill 40 men in 1 instant. The Rhine makes it worse. The current runs 5 to 7 knots, fast enough to capsize landing craft if they hit the current wrong. The water temperature is 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Troops who fall in have maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia incapacitates them. German defenses include flamethrowers positioned to fire across the water. Captured German defensive plans show interlocking machine gun positions covering every foot of shoreline. 1st Infantry Division's intelligence section estimates casualties for a opposed Rhine crossing at 35 to 40%. That's acceptable by 1945 standards. After the Hurtgen Forest, where some units took 100% casualties, losing 1 man in 3 to cross the Rhine is considered reasonable. Captain Frank Novak, enlisted in the Navy in 1940, got seasick during basic training and transferred to the Army. He ended up in the engineers, then volunteered for landing craft operations because it combined seamanship with combat. By March 1945, he's made 7 assault landings. Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Normandy, plus 3 river crossings in France and Germany. He's 27 years old, considered ancient by landing craft standards. Most LCM coxswains are 19-year-old kids who learned to drive boats in 3 weeks of training. Novak grew up on boats. His father captained Great Lakes freighters. Novak spent childhood summers learning navigation, ship handling, reading water conditions. The Army made him a captain because somebody recognized that experience matters when you're driving 50 tons of steel and humanity toward a hostile shore. Novak has seen what happens when river crossings go wrong. At the Rower River in February, he watched an LCM hit a submerged obstacle and capsize. 42 men drowned in 4 minutes. The LCM's bow ramp, designed to drop forward for rapid troop exit, acted like an anchor when the craft flipped. Men trapped inside, weighted down with 80 pounds of equipment, had no chance. He's thought about that crossing every day since. Thought about the physics of moving through water. Thought about his father's stories about false wakes and smuggler tactics. Now, in the pilot house of LCM 437, he explains his plan to Major Henderson. Sir, landing craft make wakes because we push through water faster than the current moves. The bow wave and stern wake are created by displacement. But if we match our speed to current speed exactly, we're not displacing water. We're drifting with it. Henderson's skeptical. Frank, if we just drift, we'll never reach the other side. Current will carry us downstream indefinitely. Not if we angle correctly. We motor just enough to maintain steerage and create a slow diagonal drift. The current carries us downstream, but we're also moving laterally toward the far bank, like a ferry. How far downstream do we end up? Novak's been calculating this for 2 hours. At 7 knots current and our controlled drift, approximately 3 miles. 3 miles? Henderson's voice rises. Our landing zone is right here. If we land 3 miles downstream, we're nowhere near our objectives. But, sir, we'll be across. And the Germans won't see us cross. No wakes, no noise, minimal engine signature. We slip across during the British bombardment when everyone's looking north. Once we're on the eastern bank, we march back north to our objectives. Henderson considers this. The plan violates every principle of assault landing doctrine. Landing zones are selected for tactical reasons, proximity to objectives, defensibility, ease of reinforcement. Landing 3 miles from your objective means a long march through enemy territory. But Novak's plan has one overwhelming advantage: surprise. German defensive doctrine assumes they'll see Allied crossing attempts. The Rhine is wide, crossing takes time. Landing craft are vulnerable. German machine gunners are trained to aim at the distinctive wakes. At night, wakes show up as phosphorescent trails in the water. Easy targets. If Novak can eliminate the wakes, the Germans might not spot the crossing until troops are already ashore. Henderson makes his decision. Brief the other coxswains. We try it your way. But if this goes wrong, if we drift too far, or get spotted, it's on you. Novak nods. He expected nothing less. At 0420 hours, Novak gathers the 13 other landing craft coxswains on the darkened beach. They're mostly kids. Corporal Jimmy Hastings is 19, looks 15, steers LCM 441 like he's afraid to scratch the paint. Private First Class Eddie Kozlowski, 20, drives LCM 439 like a New York taxi driver. All aggression and horn honking, except landing craft don't have horns. Novak explains the plan. Drift crossing, minimal throttle, match current speed, except downstream displacement. The coxswains stare at him like he's insane. Hastings raises his hand. Captain, my training manual says maintain 8-knot speed during assault crossing to minimize time under fire. Your training manual assumes the Germans know you're coming. This way, they won't. Kozlowski speaks up. Sir, no offense, but if we're barely making steerage way, we're sitting ducks if they spot us. Can't maneuver, can't accelerate. We're just targets. Novak doesn't sugarcoat it. If they spot us, yes, we're in trouble. But if we charge across making wakes, they definitely spot us. This way, maybe they don't. Maybe we get 183 men across without losing anybody. The coxswains digest this. They've all made assault crossings. They know the odds. Novak's plan sounds crazy, but conventional crossings are guaranteed bloodbaths. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Brennan, the senior Navy advisor attached to the battalion, listens to Novak's brief with increasing alarm. Brennan's a 22-year Navy veteran, Annapolis graduate, a by-the-book sailor who believes doctrine exists because smarter people already figured out the right way to do things. Captain Novak, this plan contradicts established amphibious assault doctrine. You're proposing to surrender maneuverability and speed, our two primary advantages, in exchange for hypothetical stealth that may not work. Novak meets his eyes. Chief, how many assault crossings have you commanded? That's not relevant. I've commanded 7. I've watched men die because we did everything by the book. Sometimes the book is wrong. Brennan's jaw tightens. I'm recommending against this operation. It's tactically unsound. Major Henderson, who's been listening silently, steps forward. Recommendation noted, Chief. We're doing it anyway. The landing craft load at 0445 hours. Infantry file aboard in darkness, 13 men per craft, plus crew. They carry M1 Garand rifles, BAR automatic rifles, mortars, ammunition, rations, everything needed to fight for 48 hours without resupply. Each man carries 80 to 90 pounds of equipment. Private First Class. Robert Dalton, 19 years old, from Omaha, Nebraska, settles onto the cold metal deck of LCM 437. This is his first combat operation. He enlisted 3 months ago, arrived in Germany 2 weeks ago. He's terrified. Sergeant Marcus Thompson, sitting beside him, fought through North Africa and Sicily. He's 24, ancient by infantry standards. First time? Dalton nods, not trusting his voice. Don't think about it. Just do what I do. When we hit the beach, run. Don't stop. Don't think. Just run. You stop, you die. Dalton wants to ask what happens if they don't make it to the beach. If the Germans see them coming. If artillery hits their craft. But he's afraid asking will make it real. Across the river, German defensive positions are quiet. Hauptmann Ernst Weber commands a reinforced company of the 84th Infantry Division, defending 3 kilometers of riverfront. His positions are good. Concrete bunkers with interlocking fire lanes, pre-registered artillery coordinates, anti-personnel mines, covering the beach approaches. Weber is 31 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front. He survived Stalingrad, pulled out in the final airlift. He knows the war is lost. Germany is collapsing. But he also knows the Allies must cross the Rhine, and when they do, his job is to kill as many as possible. His observation post overlooks the river. He can hear the British bombardment to the north, see the artificial moonlight reflecting off low clouds. Radio reports indicate the main crossing is underway. Weber expects orders to displace north, reinforce the threatened sector. What he doesn't expect is a crossing right here, right now, while everyone's attention is focused on the British attack. At 0500 hours, Novak receives the order. Execute. He keys his radio. All craft, begin approach. Minimum throttle, match current speed, maintain interval. LCM 437's diesel engine rumbles to idle. Novak releases the beach mooring and feels the current immediately grab the craft. The Rhine wants to carry him downstream. He's going to let it. He advances the throttle just enough to maintain steerage. The craft begins a slow diagonal drift, moving across the river at perhaps 2 knots, relative to the bank, but also sliding downstream at 7 knots. The combined motion creates a lazy diagonal path. Behind him, 13 other landing craft follow. The formation looks wrong to every conventional assault doctrine. Spacing too wide, speed too slow, angle too oblique. But the wakes, the distinctive V-shaped patterns that scream landing craft here, are almost invisible. Just subtle disturbances in the current, indistinguishable from natural water movement. Private Dalton, crouching in the craft's well deck, can't see anything. The sides of the LCM are 6 feet high. He hears the engine throttle back, feels the motion change. They're moving, but slowly. Around him, other soldiers shift nervously. This doesn't feel like an assault landing. It feels like drifting. Major Henderson, standing beside Novak in the pilot house, watches the eastern bank through binoculars. They're 100 yards from the western shore now. The German positions are invisible in the darkness, but he knows they're there. Every second, he expects muzzle flashes, tracer fire, the scream of incoming artillery. Nothing. 200 yards, still nothing. The British bombardment to the north continues, overwhelming sound and light. Henderson realizes Novak might be right. Every German within 20 miles is watching the British attack. Nobody's looking here. 300 yards. Downstream displacement is significant now. They've drifted nearly half a mile south of their planned landing zone. Novak makes minor throttle adjustments, correcting their angle, keeping the diagonal drift steady. The landing craft handles sluggishly at low speed, but it's controllable. Sergeant Thompson, watching from the well deck, suddenly realizes what's happening. They're crossing, but slowly, like sneaking past a sleeping guard. He's made 4 assault landings. Every previous crossing was full throttle, maximum speed, trying to minimize time under fire. This feels wrong, but he hasn't heard a single shot fired at them. 350 yards. Novak can see the eastern bank now, a dark mass against slightly less dark sky. Navigation is by instinct and feel. He's steering by the sound of the current, the way the craft handles. Tiny visual cues most people wouldn't notice. Skills learned in 15 years of being around boats. Henderson grips the pilot house rail. They're committed now. Too far to turn back, too close to accelerate. If the Germans spot them in the next 60 seconds, they're dead. At 05:23 hours, LCM 437's bow touches the eastern bank. Novak immediately throttles up, running the craft onto the shore. Behind him, the bow ramp drops with a hydraulic hiss. "Go! Go! Go!" Sergeant Thompson screams. Infantry sprint down the ramp onto German soil. No machine gun fire greets them. No artillery. Just darkness and silence. Dalton stumbles down the ramp, expecting bullets. Nothing. He hits the muddy shore, runs 20 yards, throws himself into a crater, gasping. He's alive. They're across. Within 4 minutes, all 14 landing craft beach successfully. 183 men reach the eastern shore without a single casualty. They've crossed the Rhine completely undetected. Chief Warrant Officer Brennan, climbing out of LCM 443, stares back at the river in disbelief. They drifted for 23 minutes, covering 400 yards laterally and 2.8 miles downstream. Brennan's never seen anything like it in 22 years of naval service. Major Henderson assembles his company commanders quickly. They're 3 miles south of their planned landing zone, deep in German rear areas. The original plan is useless. They need a new one. We march north along the river, Henderson decides. Stay close to the bank, use the terrain, avoid German strongpoints. Our objective is the road junction at Halen. If we can get there by dawn, we collapse the entire German defensive flank. It's 6 miles to Halen. They have 90 minutes until sunrise. They start marching. The battalion moves in column, scouts forward, main body following. The terrain is typical German farmland, flat fields, scattered woods, occasional villages. German defensive positions are oriented toward the river, facing west. Nobody expects American infantry attacking from the south, from behind German lines. At 05:47 hours, the lead scouts encounter a German supply convoy. 3 trucks hauling ammunition to forward positions. The Germans aren't expecting enemy contact. The convoy isn't even properly secured. The engagement lasts 45 seconds. Bar fire shreds the lead truck. The other 2 trucks stop. German soldiers bail out, hands raised. 18 prisoners, 3 trucks full of ammunition, captured without American casualties. One of the German soldiers, a 17-year-old kid from Bavaria, keeps saying, "We sind Sie hier gekommen." How did you get here? Nobody answers because even the Americans aren't quite sure. By 06:15 hours, the battalion has covered 4 miles. They're moving through German rear areas like ghosts. Twice, they bypass German positions without being detected. The Germans are focused on the Rhine, expecting attacks from the river. Nobody's watching their back door. At 06:43 hours, they reach the outskirts of Halen. The town sits at a critical road junction. German supplies and reinforcements moving to counter the British crossing must pass through here. The town is lightly defended, maybe 50 German soldiers, mostly logistics troops. Henderson makes his plan quickly. 2 companies hit from the south. 1 company blocks the northern road. We take the town, hold it, cut German supply lines. The attack goes in at 06:55 hours, just as the sun breaks the horizon. German defenders are completely surprised. Americans attacking from the wrong direction, from inside their own defensive perimeter. The defense collapses in 20 minutes. 53 German soldiers surrender. American casualties, 2 wounded, neither seriously. By 07:30 hours, 2nd Battalion controls Halen. They've cut the main German supply route just as the British crossing up north reaches critical phase. German units trying to reinforce against Montgomery's assault find their supplies cut off, their rear areas compromised. The radio message that reaches 1st Division headquarters at 07:45 hours is simple. 2nd Battalion across. Halen secured. No significant casualties. The staff officers reading the report are baffled. How did an entire battalion cross the Rhine, penetrate 3 miles into German rear areas, and capture a defended town with almost no losses? The answer is already being debated at Corps headquarters. Novak's drift crossing violated doctrine so completely that it worked because the Germans never conceived anyone would try it. Sometimes the best tactics are the ones that break all the rules. German reaction comes at 08:20 hours. A counterattack by elements of the 84th Infantry Division, approximately 200 men with armor support. They're trying to retake Halen and reopen the supply route. But Henderson's battalion is dug in. They've got captured German ammunition. They've got good positions. The counterattack hits at 08:45 hours. German infantry advance supported by 2 Panzer IV tanks. It looks formidable, but Henderson has a surprise. One of the captured supply trucks was carrying Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets. American infantry are delighted. They've been stealing German anti-tank weapons whenever possible because they're better than the American equivalent. The first Panzer IV dies at 80 yards. A Panzerfaust through the side armor. The tank brews up instantly. The second tank reverses hastily, crashes into a building, throws a track. The crew abandons it. Without armor support, the German infantry attack collapses. By 09:20 hours, the counterattack is broken. German casualties are heavy. American casualties, 4 wounded, 1 killed. Hauptmann Weber, commanding the German defenders, retreats with the survivors. He reports to division headquarters. Americans behind our lines in battalion strength. Unknown how they crossed. Halen lost. Recommend immediate withdrawal to secondary defensive line. The German division commander has no choice. His supply lines are cut. His flank is turned. He orders a general withdrawal. By noon, the entire German defensive position along this sector of the Rhine has collapsed. British units crossing to the north meet lighter resistance than expected because German reserves that should be reinforcing are instead trying to deal with American infantry that shouldn't exist behind their lines. The Rhine crossing, planned to take 3 days of heavy fighting, succeeds in less than 24 hours. Casualties are a fraction of estimates. Military historians will credit Montgomery's overwhelming firepower and careful planning. That's partly true. But the real reason is simpler. One battalion crossed where the Germans weren't looking, and the entire defensive scheme fell apart. Captain Novak spends March 24th ferrying supplies across the Rhine. The engineers have built a pontoon bridge, but landing craft still carry priority cargo. Nobody mentions his unorthodox crossing. Official after-action reports describe a successful assault crossing under supporting fire. The drift technique isn't mentioned. Doctrine doesn't have a category for it. On March 25th, Novak is ordered to report to division headquarters. He assumes he's being disciplined for violating assault crossing procedures. Instead, Major General Clarence Hubner, commanding the 1st Infantry Division, is waiting. Captain, I've read the reports on your Rhine crossing. Your technique was unorthodox. Novak stands at attention. Yes, sir. Also brilliant. You got an entire battalion across without casualties. That never happens in assault crossings. How did you learn to do that? My father, sir. He was a ship captain. Taught me about reading water, using current, minimizing wake signature. Hubner nods slowly. The Army's going to study your technique. Incorporate it into amphibious doctrine. You'll probably be asked to write a technical manual. Novak thinks about this. Sir, with respect, I don't think you can write a manual for it. It requires reading the specific current, adapting to local conditions, making judgment calls. It's not something you learn from a book. Then how do we train people to do it? Put them in boats, sir. Let them make mistakes in training so they don't make them in combat. And maybe listen when the sailors who grew up on boats suggest things that sound crazy. Hubner laughs. It's the first time Novak's heard a general officer laugh in 9 months of combat. Fair point, Captain. Dismissed. The technique Novak pioneered is used exactly twice more during World War II. Once in the Pacific, crossing a river on Luzon. Once in the Po River crossing in Italy. Both times, it works. Both times, casualties are minimal. But it never becomes standard doctrine because it requires skills most landing craft coxswains don't have. Reading water, feeling current, making constant tiny adjustments, based on conditions that change minute to minute. After the war, Novak goes back to the Great Lakes. He captains cargo ships, the same work his father did. He rarely talks about the war. When he does, he doesn't talk about the Rhine crossing. He talks about the men he lost at the Roer River, the landing craft that capsized, the 42 soldiers who drowned. In 1958, a young Army lieutenant researching amphibious operations contacts Novak. The lieutenant is writing his master's thesis on unconventional river crossing techniques. He's heard rumors about a drift crossing at the Rhine. He wants to know if it really happened. Novak agrees to an interview. He explains the technique, the physics, the risk assessment that led him to try it. The lieutenant takes detailed notes. Captain Novak, why isn't this technique in the manuals? It seems clearly superior to conventional assault crossings. Novak considers this. Because it requires experienced boat handlers. The Army can't guarantee that. They need doctrine that works even when executed by inexperienced crews. Conventional crossings charge straight across at maximum speed. That's simple enough that a kid with 3 weeks of training can do it. My technique requires judgment, experience, instinct. You can't train that in 3 weeks. So the Army prioritizes techniques that anyone can execute over techniques that work better but require skill? The Army prioritizes techniques that work reliably with average soldiers. That's not wrong. Most soldiers are average. Doctrine has to work for them. The lieutenant's thesis, Unconventional Amphibious Assault Techniques, Case Studies from World War II, is filed in the Army War College Library. Perhaps a dozen people read it. Novak's Rhine crossing becomes a footnote in military history, overshadowed by Montgomery's massive Operation Plunder. But the men of the 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry, remember. They crossed the Rhine without losing a single man. They attacked German positions from an impossible direction. They helped collapse an entire defensive sector. And they did it because one captain had the experience to recognize that sometimes the book is wrong. Private Dalton, who survived the war, returns to Omaha, becomes an accountant, raises 4 children. He tells his grandchildren about crossing the Rhine. They don't believe him. Crossing a major river without the enemy noticing sounds like a tall tale. Grandpa, how did the Germans not see you? We didn't make wakes. The captain knew how to drift without creating disturbance. The Germans were looking for wakes, and we didn't make any. That sounds impossible. Dalton shrugs. Most of the war felt impossible, but we did it anyway. The physics of Novak's technique are simple once explained. Landing craft create wakes by moving faster than surrounding water. Wake size is proportional to speed differential. Reduce speed differential to 0, and the wake disappears. But maintaining 0 differential while still making forward progress requires using current to provide propulsion. The landing craft becomes a glider, using the river's energy instead of fighting it. Modern military manuals include a brief section on reduced signature crossings in the Amphibious Operations Field Manual. The technique is attributed to Field Innovations during Rhine crossing operations, 1945. Novak's name doesn't appear. In 1982, a Special Forces team uses a modified version of Novak's technique to cross a river in Central America during a classified operation. They drift across at night, completely undetected, insert into hostile territory, and extract 3 days later. The operation is so successful that Special Forces incorporates low-signature crossing techniques into their training. The instructor teaching the course has never heard of Frank Novak. He learned the technique from a manual that learned it from a thesis that learned it from an interview. The chain of knowledge transmission is intact, but the source is forgotten. Novak dies in 1979 at age 61 of a heart attack while piloting a freighter through a storm on Lake Superior. He's doing the work he loves, on the water, fighting weather and current the way his father taught him 50 years earlier. His obituary in the Duluth newspaper mentions his World War II service briefly. Captain Frank Novak, U.S. Army, served with distinction in Europe, awarded Bronze Star. It doesn't mention the Rhine. Doesn't mention 183 men who lived because he knew how to read water. Doesn't mention that his crazy idea, rejected by Navy advisors, worked perfectly because it was based on a lifetime of practical experience rather than theoretical doctrine. Major Henderson, who approved Novak's plan despite regulations prohibiting it, retires as a colonel in 1958. In his personal papers, donated to the Army Heritage Center after his death, there's a handwritten note dated March 23, 1945. Today proved that sometimes the best military decisions involve trusting the guy who knows boats instead of the guy who knows doctrine. Novak saved 183 lives by ignoring regulations. I should ignore regulations more often. The note is filed in a box of miscellaneous papers. A researcher finds it in 2003, doesn't understand the context, and files it back without comment. The Rhine crossing itself becomes a legend of Allied military competence. Montgomery's Operation Plunder is studied in staff colleges as an example of overwhelming force properly applied. Patton's crossing at Oppenheim is celebrated as audacious opportunism. 1st Division's crossing is mentioned as supporting operations. The drift crossing, the technique that put infantry behind German lines without casualties, is forgotten. Not because it didn't work, but because it doesn't fit the narrative of modern warfare. Modern warfare is supposed to be about technology, firepower, overwhelming resources. It's not supposed to be about a captain who learned to read water from his father, applied 19th century smuggler tactics to 20th century amphibious warfare, and succeeded because nobody expected such a simple solution. But the soldiers who crossed that night never forget. At reunions of the 16th Infantry Regiment, veterans who made that crossing buy drinks for each other and tell stories. The stories get better with time. The river gets wider. The German defenses get stronger. But the core truth remains. They crossed the Rhine without firing a shot, without taking a casualty, without being detected. They walked into German rear areas like they owned the place, captured a critical road junction, and collapsed an entire defensive sector. And they did it because one man knew how to read water and had the courage to try something the manuals said was impossible. Sergeant Thompson, interviewed in 1987 for a documentary about the Rhine crossings, is asked about that night. What was different about your crossing compared to other Rhine crossings? Thompson thinks for a moment. We didn't fight our way across. We snuck across. Like we were smugglers or something, not soldiers. It felt wrong at the time. Every training manual says maximum speed during assault crossings. But Captain Novak, he ignored the manuals. He did what worked instead of what he was supposed to do. Was he a good officer? He was a boat captain who happened to be wearing an Army uniform. Big difference. Army officers think about tactics and objectives. Boat captains think about current and wind and how to get from point A to point B without drowning. We needed a boat captain that night, not an Army officer. We got lucky. The interviewer asks what happened to Novak. Thompson doesn't know. They lost touch after the war. He hopes Novak survived, had a good life, knew that 183 men owed him their lives. The documentary, titled The Rhine Gateway to Victory, airs on PBS in 1988. Thompson's interview is cut to 30 seconds. The drift crossing gets one sentence. Some units employed unconventional crossing techniques with success. 53 minutes of runtime focus on Montgomery's massive assault. The engineering marvels of bridge construction, the strategic importance of securing the Rhine crossings. One sentence mentions that sometimes small units did clever things. In 2011, a military history graduate,